Committee on Ordinances will come to order. Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio, video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made whether perceived or unperceived by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. Call a roll, please.
Council Kadim?
Here.
Council Kilby? Council Libby LeBeau?
Here.
Council Viveras?
Here.
Shannon Moore?
Here. Do we have anybody sign up for citizen input?
Not that
Is anybody here willing to, any citizen input? Okay, so we'll go on to the next one. Start with the, I guess we'll do the two traffics, then we'll do.
those
Okay. All right, first, second order is proposed ordinance on traffic handicap parking, which is referred 41119.
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt has been made. Is it seconded? Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any discussion?
Do we need emergency preamble?
Okay, so it's just, motion to adopt is made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Motion for
Emergency preamble.
motion for preamble has been made
Second.
and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Next order of business is proposed traffic miscellaneous referred on 41119.
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt has been made.
Pass through first reading?
Motion to adopt and pass through first reading has been made
Second.
and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. All right, we're gonna, we need a motion to take out order?
Yes.
I get a motion to take out of order, for
Number 9.
number 9, which is the marijuana licenses,
So
Councilor
moved.
Pelletier has requested. Okay.
Second.
Okay, motion to take number 9 out of order has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimous. Welcome, Council Pelletier. Can you state your name and address for the record, please? I just switch with him, Sean, grab that one.
I was gonna save that for Shannon, but then someone wants to speak.
Oh, sure, the mic's
Oh, shit, no, what happened? Why do we only have 5 minutes? No, really?
Leo Oscar Pelletier, 323 Peckham Street, Fall River, Mass. City Councilor. Who's this guy?
Okay, Mr. Pelletier,
Corporation Council,
Corporation Council.
City of Fall River.
I guess we'll start with you, Councilor.
Which one?
Yeah, I wrote, which councilor?
Oh, you.
Councilor with an S, okay. I had looked into this, I had addressed the council on this last time, but I addressed you verbally, and I think it's confusing when you read it, so I suspect it was confusing when I told you. But essentially, as I set forth in the memo, which is phrased as a memo because it really doesn't make any suggestions, basically, the city now can issue as many licenses as it wants. In order to limit the number of licenses, you would have to submit the issue to the voters, because we are one of the cities that voted to accept the statute. So you can't unilaterally limit the numbers, but there's not, if, and my last line is, alternatively, the city can submit a limiting ordinance such as that contained in the resolution to the voters. So the voters still have a chance, if it seems to be their will, to limit the number, but nobody, well, the government can't do it unilaterally. That's a short way of saying everything that's in 2 pages.
I'm under the impression that the vote that the people took, and it would take 20% of the package stores, bringing it up to 8 licenses only, and I'm to understand, but you're gonna say that I'm wrong, that I believe we can put a limit over the 8. We can say, that's all we want, is the 8. There's about 10 or 11 letters of opposition that were given out, and, it says 8, so why are we giving 10 or 11 letters of opposition? So that's my problem. I think, to me, I mean, you got the pawnbrokers, we limited it to 5 in the city of Fall River. There's 40 package stores, that's limited too. I'm to understand that I always thought that the restaurants, there's 100 of them, but according to the figures that I got today, we don't have 100, we got less than that. But I do believe that is wrong. According to the clerk, this was taken in 87, was it, Colleen?
The total?
Yeah. It wasn't taken in 219.
Oh, yeah, this is the figures from today that I got from the licensing office.
That's right
Yes.
now, in
Yes.
219.
Yes.
All right. So I don't know if we can have any more than that. I thought we had 100 and went going over the 100, but so be it. I think we can limit it. I mean, Corporation Council says no. My colleague to my right also briefed me a little bit on this, and he thinks that we can put a limitation on this. So that's what we stand. To me tonight, it was like an open and shut case. You got 8, that's it. First 8 that get it, that's it. And I got people call me up, you're absolutely right. And then I got other people call me up, gee, the city's gonna lose a lot of money. Well, here's the whole thing. You can have 15, but you can have 8, and they're gonna spend the same amount of money. Or they say, well, they're gonna go out of town. Let me tell you, if you got 8 places here in the city of Fall River, they're not gonna travel to Swansea, Seekonk, or Brockton when you can get it in Fall River. So I don't care if there's 15 or 20, they're just sharing the pie. That's all they're doing. So I think 8's enough. That's the way I feel. That's what I'm shooting for. So if I can get some help from my colleagues, other than the Corporation Council said that we can't do it or whatever, I just think we can. So I'm hoping that we can look into it a little more and try to come up with a situation that we only have 8 of them. And also, I'd like to say tonight, I know there's 2 or 3 open, but the one on Globe Street, the medical marijuana, I go at it all the time, they're open. They do absolutely nothing at all. The only guy doing any business is up the Tiverton line. They're doing good. And now they're gonna be one at the mattress shop, which is maybe 2,000 feet away. And then they got Guimond's right down the road. How many gonna put up South End? You're gonna share this thing all over the place. Poor people down the North End will have no place to buy their marijuana. You know what I mean? That's not fair. With that, I yield for now.
Sean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I'm just in disagreement with Corporation Council. I do agree with the memo. I think, and I've maintained that the way the legislation is written, if it's fewer than the 20%, then we would have to, because we passed it, go to a ballot. I think what Council Pelletier wants to do is set a limit at the 20%. So have an ordinance saying that we will not have more than 20% of whatever our licenses allow. And I think that might be the discrepancy where we're losing this, because according to, my community uses KP Law, so Seekonk is looking to put a limit at the actual 20% number, and that would just require simply a bylaw, which for us would mean that we would have to go to town meeting because we don't have a council. But here, the city council would be able to, in my opinion, just put a ordinance together as long as the limit was at the 20%, not below the 20%. So I think if Council Pelletier is looking to go below the 20%, whatever that number is, then I would agree with you. I think that would require a vote of the council and then to be on the ballot. But to have language that specifically says that the ceiling would be 20%, and that way that number obviously would be a moving target depending on, because our liquor licenses are based on population, so if for any reason our population grows and we're entitled to more liquor licenses, then that 20% would allow that ability to fluctuate for the licenses on the recreational marijuana.
Well, I didn't read the resolution that way, but I will, I think in fairness, look at it again in that light. I thought that it was simply to limit it to the 20%. And I think what I don't think, I know what you're reading is the phrase that talks about, I'm about to get it now. Section 2, or 2Is.
Right.
Limit the number to fewer.
Yep.
So if the ordinance would limit the number to fewer, then it has to go before the voting.
And if it's okay with the chairman, I can refer, send you the legal opinion from KP Law that I had that would just suggest at the
Well,
20%.
fine.
Just-
Yeah,
just,
I mean, I don't mind
and
looking
I-
at it, because I was
right.
looking at it the way it was written.
And I understand your opinion is what matters here, but I just give you a different reference point.
Well, actually, that's why, interestingly, that's why I didn't write it as an opinion. I wrote it as a memo, because there's certainly, yeah, it speaks to everything but exactly the number that 20% is.
Mhm.
So, yeah, send that to me and let me relook
Okay.
at it.
And again, just to not belabor the point, but I think if Counselor Pelletier is, again, looking to go less than the 20%, then we absolutely would have to go before the.
Yeah, I guess,
Yeah.
just since we seem to be on the same page for change,
good
the,
Sun's out.
the issue is not, can we issue more? Because the way it stands, we can't.
Right, absolutely, I agree with that.
And we can't issue less,
Mhm.
but it's the exact number of 20
That would try.
that we have to wrestle with. All right, that's fair enough.
Did I make you happy? I'll yield now.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't want less than 8 because it's gonna go back to the voters. I just don't want more than 8. So, can go through ordinance saying that we don't want no more than 8.
Well, I don't think you want to say we don't want. I think
Right.
you either adopt an ordinance that has some binding effect, or, you leave the status quo the way it is, but,
What do we call in a liquor store? Beer and wine package store, all alcohol package store?
It's off premise, so.
I think it's defined in the statute.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a
that's another
full-
portion
It's a
that I
full
didn't.
liquor license,
There's 38 of them, I believe.
not restaurants.
All right, so 38?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. Well, that would come less than 8, though. 20% of 38.
I was
We
always-
rounded off.
For some reason, I was always using the figure 40.
Is that?
I might have
don't
got
know.
that from the licensing board.
I think there's 2 that hasn't been picked up, so I'm told.
Well,
So there's 40.
we know one thing.
There's
We
40
agree,
state system.
That'd be 10.
8 is 20% of 40.
Yeah,
All right,
absolutely.
There you go.
unanimous.
That's it.
All right, so what we're saying here is, if we're talking about the base limit, right? Flooring, it's
What we're saying
20%
is-
of liquor licenses, and that would be fine, we'd be able to pass an ordinance saying that. And if the liquor licenses we're talking about is 40, then 20% would be 8.
Yeah.
8, right.
Well,
And I was just, what I was suggesting is if the interpretation is accurate, and again, I'll forward that over to Corporation Counsel so he can review it and then get his opinion on it. But if that is the case, if we just put the number 20%, it moves with the number
Right.
of liquor licenses. So if our population drops and our liquor licenses drop as they get turned back, then obviously the number of retail licenses available would also drop, assuming that they're not all outstanding already. Or if vice versa, if it goes up, then obviously that number would automatically go up instead of coming back to ordinance to address the matter. Because at some point, if you put a specific number, you potentially run the risk of not being compliant with the
Right.
state law, so.
You yield?
Oh, we're talking to you.
Oh, I do yield, I'm sorry.
Counselor LeBeau?
Judge, so what happens now with how many letters are out there now? 11? Is it still 11?
Yes, as far as I know, it's still 11.
What happens, is it the first 8 of those 11 that open? That's it?
Well, no, I think to protect ourselves, let's assume we wanted to adopt the language that it would be 20%. We may have to grandfather in the additional 3.
If they all go through the full process?
Yeah.
Okay. I just have a question in terms of the people that have received letters. From your office perspective, what is the process for people to receive a letter of support or non-opposition?
They write a letter of inquiry. I think I've gone through this, but I'll do it again. They write a letter of inquiry, sometimes to my office, sometimes to the mayor's office. We look at their qualifications and their background in the industry. As I said, it's been a reasonably long process. We decide that they're viable. We issue them a letter, and then the rest is up to the state.
But from the cities.
What we don't do is issue letters of opposition. So it's a little illusory. 11 people didn't apply, and 11 people got their licenses.
Correct.
There are people that never got past first base. There are some people, I think I was here last time and used a euphemism, didn't interview well, so they didn't get the whatever base goes past first base. There are a lot of people that call or send in a letter and never follow up. So by the time we issue the letter of non-opposition, we're pretty familiar with the entity.
So there's communication back and forth or meetings, emails?
Sometimes there's both. Sometimes there's a meeting followed up by communications. We have, some people have a fairly thick file in terms of, they've done this before. Maybe you've seen it. They have a very, I don't want to call it slick, a very professional brochure as to their purveyors and how they plan to have their security set up. Sometimes they have schematics of where they've operated before. Sometimes, particularly some of the first people that applied, they had a location and a description and, kind of a financing plan, but early in the game, the people that were applying weren't as sophisticated, so their presentation wasn't as sophisticated.
The reason I'm asking, because I'm sure you know there's a reason, is that I've had people that have since, that have contacted me that have since gone to other communities, Swansea, for instance, because they couldn't even get a meeting. They've submitted their information and couldn't even get a meeting or a call back. I have another group who is set up. They own an incredible amount of property in the city, a large investment in the city, a board, a place in a medical zone, and they couldn't even get a call back or a meeting. And they were told in August that the city was not issuing any more letters. And since August, we have issued more letters. So I'm in favor of this, if only to stop whatever is happening behind the scenes with the process, because, some people are getting letters no problem. Some people can't even get a call back or a meeting, and,
I can only tell you from my experience of one group that cannot get another meeting. And it was the group that I said didn't interview well. And one of their local representatives has come into my office from time to time and been somewhat demanding, and they're not going to get a meeting.
okay, well, I'm not sure who
But
that is.
I can share that with you privately, but I don't think it's any of the people
No.
you're talking about. I don't know.
But my worry is that, there are people that have invested in the city, that have a background in this, that have the financing, that own the property, and they can't get a call back. They've submitted letters to your office. They've submitted letters again after they realized more licenses were going out after August.
You know, as far as the people who say they've submitted letters to my office, if you give me a call, I'll look, because there's only one entity that I can think of that kind of wrote a letter to me that was a kind of a wishy-washy inquiry letter. And I'll see. The other people, I'm pretty good about getting back to people. I can't say I got back to every single person, and I can't say that everybody who contacted you is not among the inquiry, people I've got in the inquiry pile as opposed to the response pile, but I'll be glad to talk to you about it.
Okay. And then, so the 11 would be grandfathered in. So if this goes through, there would be, actually, take that back. The 11 would be grandfathered in if they all went through the process with the state. I haven't checked the state website in a while to see.
I think there's at least,
Sorry.
I thought it was a fire alarm.
We're
going to evacuate.
Loud table.
I think at least 2 of the 11 aren't even at the, next to the final stage. I check. So the question then becomes, you know, are they still serious?
Right.
So when I said the 11, I'm, you know, trying to limit our liability going forward, so
That
that's
makes
why I
sense,
picked
because
the
they've already
grandfather.
been, promised something and shouldn't necessarily have that taken away. How many have opened so far?
By my count, 3. Now, I don't know if that counts the Guimon Farms guy.
He hasn't opened yet.
No.
He's
He's
not
not set
open.
up yet.
Well, okay. Hope Heal claims they're open. I know them by the people, but I can't remember the names.
Globe Street?
Northeast Alternatives
Yep.
is definitely open.
They were the first ones.
And I think there's a third one that escapes
Globe
me
Street.
right now.
Globe Street's open, yeah.
Globe Street,
Globe?
Who's the other one?
Hope Hill, and Northeast Alternatives.
Hope Hill, is that the one in the mill in the north
Yep.
end?
Hope Hill is the one in the north end.
Yeah.
See, Counselor?
down on,
North end's all
Northeast
set.
is the one out,
On
the-
Mariano Bishop Boulevard.
yeah.
And then Globe, okay.
I'm pretty sure there's a third one that's,
Yeah.
That's
Globe.
3.
Globe Street, I can't remember the name, but they're
Yeah.
open.
Okay, with that, I yield.
Just real quickly, just for some clarification. If this goes through, we put it in as 20% is the limit, is the max, or we put in the number of,
well, I want to see the opinion he has, because what it revolves around is the language fewer. And I think probably it'd be safe to use, if that's what the council wants to do, the language of the statute, which is 20% of the, it describes the type of licenses. 20% of the number of licenses issued within the city or town for the retail sale of alcoholic beverages not to be drunk on the premises where sold under section 15 of chapter 138. I think those are package stores, and I think that it's 40 licenses. At least that's the number I've always used.
it's licenses and not stores, right? Or is it stores that are
Licenses.
open?
Well, I think
Actual licenses.
it's licenses, but I think you need a license for each location.
I'm just, it would take some considerable
Listen,
fluctuation to change the numbers. but I'm
as I
just
think
trying to
I've
figure out-
explained to the council before, and why I always say I think is, because I talk to a lot of people about this, and sometimes I don't know who I told what, but this whole regulatory scheme on the state end got away from the state. I think when they passed medical marijuana, they felt they had a 5-year window to iron everything out, and lo and behold, maybe 18 months to 2 years later, recreational came in, and then who wanted medical anymore? And then, luckily, the floodgates didn't open. The Cannabis Control Commission has taken their time, so, we're having the opportunity to address some of the issues that weren't addressed up front, including the Board of Health regulations. But
Yes, sir. Just a point, do these letters expire?
No. What does, it doesn't expire, but what can happen is, once they get our letter, the license is in the control of the Cannabis Control Commission. So at any of their several steps along the way, they can say no.
Yeah, but I'm saying, suppose they don't make it in the first round and they say no, and they still have the letter of non-opposition. Can they go back, rectify their situation maybe, and reapply to the state and say, I still got my letter?
Well,
Can I do it 2
if
years
the
from now,
state
3 years from
rejected
now?
them, I think they could come back. However, depending what we do with this, or depending on why they were rejected, you know, if they were viable when we gave them the letter, and they were rejected because they're not viable, they don't ipso facto become viable.
But we can rescind our letters anytime we want, can't we?
After a certain point, at least the Cannabis Control Commission takes the position you can't, because they don't want to go halfway down the road and find out.
No, but if we
that
were
you-
following this and we found out that either somebody never really followed through with the Cannabis Commission in a timely way, or was rejected by the Cannabis or something other
Well,
goes on.
rejected by the Cannabis Commission is easy. That's,
We just say
they're
we're
done.
pulling it back.
Whether, and I suspect that a lot of what we're talking about now is going to come out as the process gets more sophisticated. Pretty soon, I think, somebody will say, maybe the Cannabis Control Commission, look, you got to step 3, you had to go 7 steps, you don't get to step 4 by October 1st, you're out.
Yeah.
So,
And on the other side of that is, we're talking 8, whatever, but, these licenses are not cheap. They're pretty expensive to get. I think 8 within this city would be probably more than enough, and I don't think 8 would be viable, and if they were to try and compete over a course of time, I think somebody gets knocked out of that
well, I
box.
think maybe some of the delay in processing some of these people is exactly that. They're realizing it's very,
The limited market.
well, the market is one thing, but the upfront costs, and, nobody, and I think I've mentioned this before, but maybe I haven't, nobody will finance these.
No.
Banks, regular commercial lenders won't finance these. So, they've got some problems, and,
Yeah, I think we're fine. Council Kadim, do you have a motion on this? You want to table it?
Motion to table it, to give the Corporation Council enough time to just kind of come back to the ordinance committee with his final opinion at the 20%.
Or could we
Or
send
can
it,
we just table it
send
to the
it-
next meet?
send it to the council with a vote of yes, if we want, pending his,
Well, I think at that point.
I'd be
we
more
would-
comfortable,
you would
I know
have-
how,
you would
I
have
know
to-
it's your motion, I don't want to, I'd
We'd
be
have to
more
draft-
comfortable
Okay.
having something drafted
I was gonna say.
with some rationale for plus or minus, or what I think, that then you could do it or not do it all at once.
Right, I agree. I think we would just have to have some type of language so that we can have for the ordinance.
So
I
which-
would just table it to the next ordinance meeting. I mean, that should be
Yeah, that's
enough
fine,
time.
that'll be enough time.
motion to table.
Second.
Motion to table has been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Opposed?
fellow members, thank you
Okay.
very much.
Have a good night.
Resolution is tabled for now. I need a motion to take number 6 out of
Vegas.
order. To allow Bob Smith to come down and talk about the waterway fee. He's the only, then we got the building thing. Yeah.
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Motion to take 6 out of order has been made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. Come on down. It's clear here, man. Vacant buildings. No, then we'll do the vacant building fees after that one. Because actually, that's the next one we would have done anyway.
Mr. Chairman, I reviewed it. I'm in favor of making a motion to adopt. I guess the only question I would have, I know there was a fee of $500 and $1,000, I believe, for the different. I was just curious as to, this fee, is it just going to be applicable to those boats that are registered or housed from the city, or how's that feasible?
It would be applicable to any of the commercial boats that visit the city. It seems like the reason I brought this to the attention of the administration, actually, Mr. Chairman, could I just give you these pictures to look at? I have a look.
Again, yeah.
There you go. There's two copies of it. So I just wanted to make it clear that this ordinance does not apply in any way to the recreational boaters. It applies to a very, very select group of commercial, what has the potential to be nuisance boats that are being kind of parked here as dead storage because it's so much less expensive to keep these boats in Fall River than it is otherwise. And Fall River is unique in that we have so much industrial waterfront that there's no other place to keep these things. And it just seems we're accumulating a lot of them. And they're not part of a working waterfront community, which would be a good thing. They're just dead storage here in between use. So they're being repaired. A lot of them are just unsightly barges. And the potential is we've had an increase of oil spills recently, which we're certain, is related to these commercial boats being here.
Are we talking about transit boats?
We're talking about commercial fishing boats, barges, work boats.
I'm talking like you get,
Fast ferry.
yeah, guys that come in every,
Yeah, exactly. Anything that visits Fall River. Say we get a lot of boats that are foreign flag boats that go to the state pier
Right.
from Haiti and Belize and
Yeah.
Libya, whatever. We have very, very little regulatory authority over these boats, yet they're in our waterways. The state pier has no facilities for waste facilities or gray water removal, and they could be here for a week at a time, and they're constantly pumping this gray water into the waterways. There's,
I thought that was illegal.
it's regulated, but it's not enforced. They can't pump waste over, but traditionally these commercial boats and the commercial segment is notorious for doing their pump outs at night when no one's around. The bilges on all these boats accumulate oil. They've got hydraulics, they've got electronic generators and oil generators. So it accumulates in the bilge, and it seems like New Bedford's faced this, Fairhaven's faced this. And at some point, we'll need to do something about it. But they're not contributing anything at all to the city, and yet the city is providing all the emergency services, should something happen on these boats.
So where are they being stored? They're being state pier, or is it-
The state pier is a lot of them. A little bit south of the Brightman Street Bridge has been accumulating a lot of barges. It seems they're multiplying. There was 1 or 2. Now there's 6 or 7 there. It's pretty unsightly. Their origin is mostly unknown. The ownership is unknown. When I did document checks on all of them, I haven't found a single commercial vessel that was ownership by a resident of Fall River. They're all LLCs out of state or out of the area. Fair amount of them from New Bedford and Fairhaven.
So in terms of just applying the fee, so once we get the fee, how are we gonna, how would you apply that? Because, it's transient, right? So how do you,
On the boats that visit the state pier, I would hope we could work out an accommodation with the management of the state pier where they would add it to their dockage fee. If they, they're there for 3 or 4 days or 5 days, they add it to their bill. The rest of them, I don't think it's going to be an easy task, but I'm sure, I don't know, maybe the city administrator has an idea how the city would collect those. We can find the ownership and we can bill them for sure.
And you recall, even with our other excise, we provide a sticker. And the sticker would essentially say that the appropriate fee had been paid. And then the harbor master then has a right to check to see if there's any kind of a sticker available on the vessel. And if not, then they obviously haven't paid the fee. So, there may be a process whereby it's a form of registration and associated fee that might work. But I think that in the case where the state pier, obviously there should be a collaboration between them. And even the dockage facility where they're mooring, we can approach those owners and let them know that there's a new fee required and that the fee is obligated to be paid and require that they provide notice to us as well, so.
Would these be an annual fee, or is it just a use fee?
It would be an annual fee for the commercial boats that are docked here, and it would be a a use fee on a per-use basis for the state pier, say the ships that come in to load cargo.
So transit cargo ships would pay per port of call. Every time they dock, they pay.
Exactly right. It would be a $500 docking fee.
But if you had the tugboats that go out of Fall River and they're parked there, they would just pay a one-time fee.
One-time annual fee. And by the way, I just want to add, all the recreational boats in Fall River pay their fair share through an excise tax. All the commercial boats are exempt. They pay nothing.
And documented vessels.
And documented vessels. Exactly.
Any other questions?
Just in terms of the state pier, and I don't know the answer to this question. Does the state charge a fee for the boats that go to the state pier?
They do, and I think that's one of the issues. Because the Fall River State Pier, their rates are so low, that's what's attracting these boats here from New Bedford and Fairhaven. And I've got the rates for the State Pier in New Bedford, and they charge $200 a day for the boat to be docked there. The State Pier, the manager told me she gets $600 a month for the same size vessel.
And they get $200.
$200 a day.
Jeez.
And that's why they're stacking them up in Fall River.
Okay, I yield.
Any other questions?
Could you just repeat the statement that you said?
Mm-hmm.
You said all personal boats pay an excise tax?
Yeah, all the recreational boats at all the marinas pay an excise tax. It's a very, very low excise tax. It's a formulation by the state. The average annual excise tax bill is only about $40 to $60 per boat. It doesn't go on the value of the vessel itself.
Okay, but in commercial boats, pay nothing, you said?
The commercial boats are exempt, commercial fishing boats.
Because I had heard from some folks that said, well, we're already paying that in our excise tax, but this isn't applied to them.
No, all the commercial fishing boats, and actually every one of these boats that I've put in this small targeted group are absolutely exempt. They don't contribute anything to the city.
Thank you, I yield.
Any motions on this? Entertain a motion to adopt or to refer?
Motion to adopt? Motion to adopt?
And refer it to the council, full council.
Refer to full council, yeah.
Put it through first reading. Motion to adopt, refer to council and put it through first reading has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Unanimous.
Thank you.
Next matter is vacant building registration fee.
Motion to adopt as proposed. It looks like we're just getting in line with the fiscal year.
Yep.
Second?
What we need right there? We good?
Be first reading? Yep.
Motion to pass through first reading has been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that's good. Number 5, proposed ordinance, the park board approval process. Was referred on 423.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Smith is actually she's at a park board meeting that is ongoing at the moment. Effectively, what they are looking to do is change the existing ordinance in 2 key areas. Right now, the ordinance that was passed back in 2007 requires that any changes made to parks have to or require that a public hearing be conducted. What the park board is asking is that the word hearing be changed to say public meeting. Obviously, the agendas are posted, and it would allow someone opportunity to come and be heard on that, as opposed to paying, the cost of advertising and conducting an actual hearing. And additionally, right now, in the existing ordinance, it says that this hearing or public meeting, which is our request, would be to publicly discuss a major change to a public park. The existing ordinance defines major change as something valued at $10,000 or more. Now, not the least of which is the realization that the cost of things has dramatically increased, so the $10,000 number is is suspect. But additionally, what they are requesting is that the term major change be altered in the ordinance to say a change to the layout, footprint, or present use of the park property, which clearly reflects something far more substantive ongoing in the park that certainly would be worthy of public input prior to passage. So those are the two primary changes that they're looking for.
Councilor LeBeau?
Thank you. I'm glad to see this in front of us. I had a conversation with some park board members when it was in front of the council to purchase the 2 lots by Maplewood Park. So this ordinance was in place that Section C, for the purposes of this ordinance, the term major change to a public park shall mean any change involving an expenditure of more than $10,000, whether such expenditure is made by the city or by others. So they would have had to, which wasn't said to us at that meeting, they would have had to hold a public hearing on the city purchasing that land, wouldn't they have?
Well, the
According to
process,
this
yeah, I'm sorry, Council.
2007, yeah.
Yeah, the process in terms of acquisition is the city would have actually acquired the property with city council approval. The city council has to make those decisions, but then the properties would need to be turned over, right, to the park board. So technically, they wouldn't have had the public hearing prior to the purchase, but they would have had it prior to acceptance of the land as part of the park property.
So if they then had if the city had purchased the land, if it was voted on and they purchased the land, and then it went to the park board, and the park board said, no, we don't have the funds or the manpower, or we just disagree with it, we've already purchased the land. It doesn't really make sense.
That's correct, Counselor. And I think as it probably would have unfolded, we needed to obviously get council approval to purchase. The council wasn't so inclined, so I guess the park board could have made a decision, but then had the council not approved the purchase, it would not have gone forward either way. But I do think this particular change is important because it does speak to the public requirement of activities. Right now, even a major project in the park, when we were doing a lot of work with the parks, with their walkways, with adding amenities, all of that is a major change that, again, needs to be brought before the public for their input and consideration, so.
But it doesn't say in here that it is before a vote of the council, so.
No, that's just for the acquisition, Counselor, you're correct. So if those parcels would have changed the layout of the park, so it certainly would have required that there be a public meeting, public hearing based on the existing ordinance, public meeting based on the proposed ordinance, prior to the park board making a decision on the project.
I yield.
Councilor Kadim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm okay with a majority of the changes. I would suggest, I guess, under Section 1, the new language that they're proposing, I know what they're trying to do is eliminate the actual public hearing and the 2-week notifications and the advertising. And they are suggesting that it duly posted public meeting, and I think the intent is to still have a hearing. So what I would ask is that we strike duly posted public meeting and just shall hold a hearing, but not a public hearing, so at least we know that the public still has the opportunity to be at the meeting and have some input. Otherwise, I mean, just holding a duly posted meeting just means that it's exactly what you have to do anyways, right? That's
Yeah.
a duly posted
There's an
meeting. It's
agenda,
just
right.
a park board meeting.
Yeah, what do you
Correct.
post a duly posted meeting?
Right, so that's just doing the posting 48 hours in advance of.
Correct.
Online?
Yeah.
Yeah, but all right, so I have a question, I guess.
So I would just say
Yeah.
hearing, obviously the difference between, it's not a public hearing, it's just an actual hearing that would be conducted by the park board. And whoever shows up can give input at the hearing, but it doesn't need to be advertised, you don't need because there's a difference between public hearings, like when we do licensing hearings, it's a licensing
Sure.
hearing, well, I guess that's not really, well, yeah, some licensing hearings require a public hearing, others just is regular hearings that you don't have to actually post in the newspaper, advertise 2 weeks in advance, so you can just have the hearings in advance, or as long as it's posted 48 hours prior to a meeting. So-
Again, I would defer to the clerk on that. You may be correct, Counselor, but I've never made that finer distinction. To me, a hearing is a public hearing that, requires advertisement. If you're correct, then we could certainly embrace that change. I think the park board was thinking the meeting, because it's posted in advance and people are aware of what's happening, would
So-
suffice, but we'd be open.
So I just asked that we ask Corporation Counsel to review that, because I think Mass General Law for public hearings, and it's public,
Right.
has very specific guidelines that you have to follow. 2 weeks notification in the newspaper, things of that nature.
14 days.
Versus a hearing. I think a hearing is just what we would be calling, allowing the community to have some input into a change, but it doesn't need to be posted, so. So it gives you, it gives you a little bit more leeway, but also ensures that we will allow the public to speak on, which I think they should have the right to speak on, major changes to a park, so.
Well, and that all of the meetings are requiring citizen input at this point as well,
Yeah.
but you're right, there may be some limitations to what that testimony might be. So I'm sure they would be fine with that. We just need to clarify that, there is an alternative definition for the word hearing, and that, it's acceptable in this context.
That yields.
I just get, if we do what this says and we take out section 2 and 3 and rename, if we were going into a park and we were just going to say, do the road through the park or the sidewalks in the park, that's not a major change. It's not, we wouldn't even have to have a hearing. They would just be able to do it.
I know, Counselor, I think their intention is that would require a hearing.
Well, that's
Any-
not the way I read it.
Well, they're saying what they're, and this is their definition, but I think it may cover it. It says, it changes the layout, the footprint, or present use of the park
So
property.
if they're gonna do
So,
all the sidewalks in the park, they're not changing the use, they're not doing anything. They're not gonna tell anybody, they're just gonna start doing it. And nobody even knows it's coming. I don't like that part of this.
okay.
Okay, even if they were
So-
gonna go in and say, hey, we're gonna do the basketball courts over, they wouldn't need any public hearing, nobody would, and they could just go in and take out the basketball courts.
So-
I don't think I'm in favor of that.
Yes, so I think what you may want to do then is any major change to a public park of, and
I like the $10,000 piece.
I think 10,000 is a little low. I think it just kind of handcuffs the administration nowadays. I
What
don't
do you
know
think,
that- I-
15, 20?
I don't know,
What do you
even if it's 50 or 100,000, right? I would say 100,000. I think, you talk about a couple of benches or something like that.
They're
That's
expensive, I get it.
yeah,
But I'm
so-
just, I just think when we get into our parks and we start to make changes in parks, even if it's just to redo the sidewalks, or you're gonna go, or change the present use, I mean, that was, it's kind of vague as to what that is. There's a lot of stuff that could go on. And when we get to our parks, a lot of people hold their parks very close, and they wanna know what's going on in them. And I just wanna make sure that whatever's gonna be happening in our parks, that the public is duly notified as to what is happening in our parks. And I don't care what it is, even if we're just redoing the basketball courts or redoing the sidewalks. I just want them to know what's going on. That's all.
So, Mr. Chairman, could I suggest that we table this until the next council meeting and just have a representative from the park board and the director of Parks and Recs here, just so that when we're hammering this out, that we're all in agreement.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and again, it was just unfortunate that it was the same night as the park board meeting, so otherwise they certainly would have been here, but that's fine.
I don't think she'll be ready for it. So we'll just table, we'll go to the next one until we go. I mean, it's not something that's pressing, is it? I don't think so.
And if I could just ask Corporation Counsel if you can look at the definition on the Massachusetts General Law between hearing versus public hearing? If there's,
You want it now?
no, not now, no, for the next
There's a
meeting.
difference, but I'll
Yeah,
figure
yeah,
it out.
okay, perfect,
In this ordinance, I don't know if it makes any difference. but there is a difference.
okay.
Okay, so what's the
Appreciate it.
motion?
So motion to table until the next ordinance meeting?
Second.
Motion to table has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Unanimous. Okay, now where are we? All right, we got proposed ordinance for the organizational chart. Number 7.
So councilors, Mrs. Sahadi can speak to the specific origins of this, but I know that we've mentioned to the council on some prior occasions of our interest in taking a look at the organizational structure and making it easier for accountability regarding who's reporting to whom and their expertise in those particular areas. And additionally, we are looking to align it with the accounting system, and I'll ask Mrs. Sahadi to explain further.
Certainly. Good evening, everyone. So what we're trying to do here is to align the functions of government and then the departments under those functions of government in compliance with the Department of Revenue Bureau of Accounts structure. Our munis accounts are already set up with this structure. They were set up with this structure early on. Really what the difference is all of the individual departments will now report up to both Mrs. Viveris and I, as opposed to there being the super departments that exist in the current structure, where there are only a few people who actually are responsible to report up. The division department heads, if you will call them that, the division heads now report to the department head, who then reports up. And so, to some extent, this is taking away some of our rights that we currently have, in the sense that we can now transfer monies between each of the divisions within a department. We will no longer be able to do that, but realistically, with zero-based budgeting and holding each of the current division heads that will technically be department heads, they will have to be responsible for their own budgets, and at this particular point, they really are. So we're really just trying to clean up, if you will, the structure that we currently have and put it more in line with what the Department of Revenue recommends as a function of government.
Can I just, sorry.
Council Kadim.
So I guess that last part was interesting. I wasn't necessarily looking at it from the aspect of losing the ability to transfer, obviously, salaries to salaries within the department. I was taking that you would still have that ability under general government, so you'd be able to take salaries from everybody that was listed under the general government.
No, so the general government,
Is that
public
not how-
safeties, education, et cetera, those are just going to be the functions that will appear in the financial reporting. But the actual departments will all be individual departments, so we will no longer be able to transfer, like, for an example, right now, city administrator, the law department, MIS, and I think it's HR, are all within the same department, so they can transfer between
Right.
salaries, and so that right, basically, will be taken away, and that we would have to come to council if we needed any transfers within any one of those, what we will now call departments.
So you're expanding the departments.
We're narrowing them.
Yeah, so essentially, they've created categories, but each subcategory now becomes a department.
That's
So-
correct.
And those are just categories, Counsel, you're correct.
So I guess, normally I'm one that wants to have accountability. I don't know that I necessarily agree with this. I just think what you're taking away will create more of, I guess it's going to hamper the ability for any one administration to conduct day-to-day business, right? So I know we meet every 2 weeks or at least twice a month, but I just think in terms of, from a financial standpoint, if things are coming up, and having that flexibility to make adjustments within, obviously, and I know we only come down quarterly, but to be able to make those adjustments within the various departments is useful and helpful, as long as it makes sense and is transparent. If you're proposing it, I guess, I don't know that, you would want to always come down on a quarterly, because I know at any given point, I mean, you could have a situation where the treasurer's office is running a little high because of overtime, and you're understaffed in the assessor's office because you have a vacancy, and so being able to just transfer that money from the assessor's office and the treasurer's office makes sense, right? You have it within that department. I don't know. I think you know what you're trying to say.
Yeah, we appreciate, you're right, and we acknowledge we're losing some flexibility, but I think on the practical side of it as well, not only do all of these account numbers now align, which they didn't before, but also without, I don't mean to be derogatory to any one individual, but the reality is the way it's set up now, we have people reporting to other people who really have no idea as to the day-to-day functions of those departments. And that's where we're adding a level of reporting to people who really don't fully understand what's happening. As an example, we have the Director of Health and Human Services was technically overseeing code enforcement. Now, Mr. Hathaway, just by state statute, really has a lot of autonomy and a lot of flexibility, and yet in the current system, he technically has to report through the Director of Health and Human Services. And, there really isn't the familiarity there to make that reporting and that guidance and that managerial function really work appropriately. And we have other instances in here as well where people were put in charge of other departments simply to try to consolidate things without the real working knowledge of those that are reporting to them. So in many cases, they're either bypassing out of necessity or it's just getting very cumbersome because there's an educational process. So while we appreciate the concept, from a practical implementation, day-to-day standpoint, it really isn't functioning as it should.
Right, so I guess that was from the financial standpoint. I think from the other piece from a financial standpoint, but organizational standpoint, I mean, we've got salaries, or we've paid individuals based on the fact that they were overseeing multiple divisions. So with this, I guess one would argue that you're essentially creating some inequity amongst department heads, right? Because you're going to have individuals who were paid, I'm just going to throw a number out there, $100,000 because they were overseeing 4 different divisions within their department. So that, I guess that's one question I have, and how we're going to handle that. The other piece too is just from an operational standpoint in terms of management. I think it's span of control, really. I think when you have that ability to have a department head kind of be the first intermediate between questioning, I mean, in this case, you're going to have, I mean, so you have, take you for instance, so you're the chief financial officer. So I think one would make the argument, right, and if the administration made this statement, I think everybody would have to fall in line, that you oversee, well, you technically don't per this organizational flow chart, the auditor's office purchasing the assessors and the treasurers and the collectors. But now if I'm the treasurer, we're on the same level, and even though you have a nice fancy title as chief, financial officer, it really doesn't matter because we're side by side, and the next, well, actually, I guess you're there. That's the.
Bad example, but I
Maybe
know
not
what
the
you're
best
talking
example.
about.
But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
like, in terms
exactly,
of-
yeah.
So I guess community maintenance, community and facility maintenance is right. So, John Perry was overseeing it, or, if it was Ken Pacheco before, just falling in line. Now you've got individuals that are all on the same level, and then everybody is just coming back up to either the CFO or the city administrator. I just think on day-to-day issues and concerns, that's a lot, especially for a city this size.
Well, but again, I guess I come back to, the practical side, using that example as an instance. The traffic, the clerk, the parking clerk would report to DCM, and yet the regulations for parking and the implementation of even snow plowing and, a lot of that, she, in practice, often works through the police department as opposed to through DCM, because they're actually out there issuing the same kinds of tickets and enforcing the same type of regulations. So in that particular case, it was going through someone, and John did his best, I'm not being derogatory, John did his best to try to get familiar, but ultimately there would have to be that next level of communication. So I don't know that it was saving us the kind of, communications and streamlining that you might think, because the knowledge was peculiar to the department. I do want to address something regarding the salaries. I think overall, in looking at this, I don't think we're going to have a lot of those inequities, and we certainly would welcome the council's input on that. But I think as you look, what we're finding happening is, even when we're looking at the salaries for a lot of the department heads, it's becoming a function of their experience, their credentials, and I'll take the city engineer as an example. He's compensated probably very closely to, if not slightly more at the moment, from his DCM director, but he's a certified engineer, and we really had to pay him what we pay him because of his certification. So even the system as it exists is creating a little bit of inequity. But again, we're finding we're compensating them based on their skill set and their experience and the requirements that they need them to have, as opposed to, who they're overseeing and who they're managing. So we would certainly take a look at whether we've created any of those problems, but I would venture to say at the moment that that's probably not the case. Another example is Culture and Recreation. The library administrator, her salary is set by the Board of Library Commissioners, and I would suggest that it's actually more than the Director of Health and Human Services right now, and yet she technically, in the current structure, reports the Director of Health and Human Services. So we've already got some, I don't want to call them inequities, because I think people are being compensated for the jobs that they do and the experience and the skills that we require of them, but, we already have some differences that I don't think changing the structure is necessarily going to create any problems for us along those lines.
Yeah, I think I still need to absorb this before I vote one way or the other. I still have a concern. I guess I want to kind of really think a little bit more about this in terms of the span of control specifically. I don't want to create, while it makes sense now, I just don't want us to inadvertently create issues moving forward in terms of span of control and just the day-to-day operation. Because I know there are some tasks that overlap within departments, and you like to have somebody with those departments to be the individual that's running interference and having coordinating everything. And I just want to make sure that we're not inadvertently creating a situation where we're not promoting communication amongst the departments. So that's just me as one individual. So I yield.
Councilor Wu?
In what was presented to us, I think that it seems as if maybe we've been presented the same information twice. Normally, we get the proposed change and then the how it is originally, and we have the proposed change twice, unless I'm reading this incorrectly.
We actually have the marked up version, Counselor. It's looking pretty ugly. It's got a lot of red lines going through it, but we could certainly,
It's in the budget.
Right, all
yeah,
right.
that too, yeah.
Right, so
But
that
I mean,
there's,
if you actually wanted to see the markup of the ordinances themselves and the changes, we have that.
no,
but
I
as
can just
said,
pull it from the budget.
Well,
which is
it'll
fine,
give
I'm
you the
just not-
chart. but it-
normally, right.
Yeah, it won't give
It
you
will have
the
the-
ordinance
That's fine.
changes, yeah.
No, that's fine. Well, and the ordinance change, normally we have the, what they want to replace it with, and then the original.
But you'll see that in budget, whatever the ordinance was. So if it was like the finance department, let's say underneath in the ordinance includes the auditor's office, assessor's office, treasurer's office. So.
Correct.
So
But if anybody
the flow chart will show
goes
you.
to get this information, it's just, it's the same
Sure.
packet twice, that's all. And the other question I have is, reading the letter, I can see that it's not this way, but if I was to look at this, and it does say in the letter that then in the ordinance, that they would be under following executive branch divisions and departments, which shall be under the direction and control of the mayor's office, and then it lists them, general government, public safety, blah, blah, blah. So, just in terms of communities and facilities maintenance, there's not gonna be any positions created here.
No.
They're just gonna fall under this specific category, and these are all the individual departments with their department head.
Correct.
essentially.
And again,
These are
the account
generally
numbers are how,
Functions of
Yeah.
government.
right, their functions,
Functions,
and the
okay.
numbers are aligned with the Department of Revenue, the munis.
And that was my last question. When did, you said Munis has already been set up like this?
Yeah, it was originally way back, and I'm not even sure what year
Yeah,
it
when
was,
Munis came in.
2000
it's a long time ago.
2008, the munis came in?
No, it was earlier
Oh,
than
no,
that.
not Munis came in, that they made the changes with the division in.
Right.
I think it was 2001.
2001.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was here, I know that. I think
And what
they
that
just-
really
they just
does
started putting it in.
is, the way it's really set up in terms of anyone wanting to follow it, it follows along with the DOR website. So the town of Seekonk has 210 as police, and we have 210 as police, and they have 220 as fire, and we have 220 as fire. And all of our departments currently follow that format. The way the current chart is established is they don't necessarily, this way, under general government, it's all the 100s, under public safety, it's all the 200s, and so on.
Okay.
That's really the difference in the chart.
You're looking for this to start FY '20, or as soon as possible, or?
We haven't made the changes in the budget that's getting ready to go to print, because we didn't want to be presumptuous, and we wanted to, get the council's approval. So we would like to make the changes. There are a couple in here that really need to happen sooner rather than later. Specifically, the food and milk inspectors, their award, their permits and their citations, if you will, whatever has to be issued, have to be signed off by the Director of Health and Human Services. So this was anticipating that they would be reporting directly to her because she's the one that has to sign off on what they issue. So we can proceed to, we're kind of doing that now, Council, but we're at odds with our chart. But to your point, I mean, we've gone with it a long time. We want to get it right. So we certainly don't have any problems with it taking some time for the council to get comfortable with it. And we'd like it to happen, sooner rather than later for some of these issues. But certainly welcome your input, and we're happy to delay until we've had sufficient time to look at the current versus the proposed.
And as far as the budget goes, Counselor Kadim pretty much brought this up. The budget is prepared based on utilizing each one of these divisions as a department anyway.
Right.
So the only thing that would change in the budget book, which we won't change in the 20 book because it's ready to go to print, is something like traffic and parking right now is under community maintenance in terms of the subcategory within your budget book. And utilizing this format, it would go under the public safety tab. So there's not significant changes. And for the 20 budget, there's no intention to change it, as that budget is really ready to go to print.
Well, I just got a couple of, and I agree with Councilor Kadim. I'd like a little more time to try and, because I've been trying to absorb this and digest it a little bit, but let me ask just a couple of real simple questions. First of all, this is basically more of a financial change from your department to make sure everything's in their proper divisions and categories and that type of stuff.
Correct, Counsel.
But it,
Point of clarification.
Okay.
Just, in terms of Munis, though, Munis is already set up this way, right? So it's not like I guess that's the disconnect I'm missing. So if we already have it currently set up this way, I mean, the Department of Revenue does, or the Department of Labor Services doesn't really care what our org chart looks like.
Correct.
From management.
No, you're correct. You're 100% correct.
So
All
they're
this
just trying
is-
to make our org chart look like Munis,
Yeah.
basically.
But I do want to reiterate that there is certainly an accounting and a financial alignment that's going on here, but there is also a management alignment as well,
Well, that's
as
my
I
next
said.
question.
Yeah, because there clearly are some individuals, as I said, who are being asked to, oversee others in areas where they're really not necessarily trained and or accustomed. And as I said, they all do their best. It's
All right, so
no,
as this comes
but
into
there is a
my
managerial
second
issue.
question.
Yeah.
My second question would be, if we were to pass this, are there any individuals that are currently hired and working for the city of Fall River that are going to sustain either a cut in their salary, elimination of their positions? Is there any of that going on within this?
No, Counselor, I don't see any of that. No.
I'm good.
Sorry, just so when I absorb this, so I'm struggling with what the ultimate goal is. So if it's already currently structured this way in Munis, and for reporting purpose to the DLS, why would we change this? So to me, it's, unless I'm missing something, we're only changing the span of control, who's reporting to who.
That's correct.
That's correct.
So,
But why are we, so what's the reason for that?
well, using Mrs. Viveris's comment with regard to Health and Human Services, our current health director is a change, as you know, from our prior health director. And our current health director doesn't have the background necessary to really supervise inspectional services, for one. That's the biggest area. That she was, or he, our prior health director was responsible for. So in order for us to make that change, we need to move inspectional services. Now, if you look at what the DOR puts forth with regard to inspectional services, they're actually under public safety.
Inspectional services?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, our current health director really is having a hard time, if you will, supervising inspectional services because she doesn't have any background in that area. So that was one of the reasons why we thought it might make more sense to have each one of these divisions truly be a department, as they probably were prior to Mayor Correa's
First career.
first careers.
Yeah,
First careers,
right.
Career one.
combination of departments into divisions to create, and I'll refer to them as super departments.
Yeah, but these charts don't reflect what we're talking about. At least the charts that I have don't reflect it. For the divisions to where they're going, it looks like the same chart.
Do we have the original org chart prior to, or can we get, I'm sure it's probably in one of the budget books, prior to the change?
I
In
have
like
a printout that I
2008.
made from,
Not,
Because
not,
I went over it with her when I did. I
not
saw
the one that we
original.
not the one we currently have, the one that we,
Before.
2008,
Prior to,
yeah,
right,
I could find it, this is what we currently have, which is online.
Yeah,
currently,
no.
No, no,
I'm just curious to see what it looked like prior
Prior
to,
to 2008.
because I think that's when the change was, right?
Prior to the changes, that changed it to that, that's
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah, I think so.
I can find that.
I can look to see if I
We
can
looked
find
at
it.
it, yeah, okay.
It's gotta be available.
The old one?
I believe when the city clerk sent me the ordinances, she sent me the ordinances as they existed prior to 2008, because she said it might align itself. And I think that might actually be the copy that I was amending and working from.
Okay. If we could just get that for us.
I have the current one, I don't have
That's what's online.
Yeah, I yield.
Yield? Anybody else, any more comments? What's your pleasure? What do you wanna,
Motion to table.
what information are we requesting to,
So I'd just be looking to get a copy of the old organizational flow chart prior to the 2008 amendment to the, I guess what we're referring to, super departments.
we are good with that?
Certainly, we can certainly provide that.
There's a motion to table, do I have a second? A motion to table and seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. Okay, number 8 is a resolution to discuss establishment of an ordinance to require any stipend above 2,000. Require city council approval. It was tabled on 8/13. Need a motion to lift from the table?
So moved.
Second.
It's lifted, made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous.
Stay in the line of fire.
Speak. You can start, I guess.
Well,
Where are we
I'll
on
just, I'll
this?
just say from a budgetary point of view, in terms of full transparency, we have at least included in the budget, a column for anyone that's receiving a stipend. We have rolled, almost all of the stipends into their base salaries at this particular point, and they've been part of the most recent ordinance change. The stipends that we have left are the stipends that the city council provides to the staff, as well as, I believe there's a stipend in the city clerk's office. And I believe aside from that, unless it is for uniforms or for auto allowances. Contract, there are no additional stipends left within the budget.
Is that just because you ran out of money, or?
That could be as well. The one individual that I have included it in a column by itself, but theoretically it's not a stipend, is the individual within the mayor's office who is receiving additional monies for work she's doing for CDA. But aside from that, all the stipends are no longer
And I just want to add to that, the reason that they were rolled into the base pays was because the stipends were being provided for work that the individuals were doing on an ongoing, regular basis.
Right.
So it was not something that was only temporary or short-term or occasional. If a lot of people were getting stipends for things that were part of their regular job duties and job responsibilities.
Councilor Bo?
I think there was a resolution that had gone in prior to this. It didn't have a dollar amount on it, which I believe was adopted unanimously. I know that we have, in this committee, rolled a lot of the stipends in, but that won't necessarily stop any future stipends from being given. We've had, since the meetings here and adjusting salaries to roll them in, the $10,000 snow stipend in the mayor's office, the $5,000 secretary, which I don't necessarily disagree with. She is doing work outside of what she was originally hired for, and there is not a chief of staff. The CDA function, those are all in the mayor's office, and I think the intent of this is to stop them from continuing unless they're approved by the council, because there is nothing in place that does that. I would be in agreement with this, but I would like to see it back to what we had originally adopted, which was any stipend that's not contractual and not have a dollar amount on it. I yield.
Mr. Chairman, I know Corporation Counsel was asked to address the issue of stipend versus service out of rank. So I think what he's going to provide may help the committee understand or find some parameters.
I'm not sure it will, but I think part of the problem is there is no definition of a stipend. And I think forgetting whether it should come to the council for approval or 2,000 is enough or it should be more, I think the first thing that has to be done is define what is a stipend. Because I think I know we went through it before, but I'll just repeat that, as I see it, just as an analysis, there are three kinds of employees in the city. There are contract employees. They have a defined term, they have a defined compensation, and since their compensation is set forth in the contract, it can be varied within the contract if there's an adequate appropriation. That's not a stipend. Union employees are different. Their compensation is governed by their collective bargaining agreement, and any increase would have to be bargained for. And then you have the ordinance employees who can be, I guess, you're a class this, you get X, or you can get up to a particular amount. Their compensation could be increased to its maximum without any further action, as long as it's within the appropriation in the budget. Now, that comes full circle to what's a stipend? Certainly, if the stipend, and I think Mary's addressed it, is a payment to employees to increase their salary for the same tasks that's in their job description, it's considered salaries, wages, and either if it's a collective bargaining or an ordinance employee, it's got to be included in the ordinance. On the other hand, payment for tasks or tasks outside of a regular job description can be given additional compensation without an ordinance change as a matter of executive action, as long as it's within the budgeted appropriation. So I think from the time the resolution was passed, which was almost a year ago, to the current budget cycle, a lot of the concern was addressed. But at some point, if we want to address the issue of stipends, then we've got to address what a stipend is. And I think you're going to have trouble doing it, because I've wrestled with it myself.
I just want to respond to that, Judge. What we've had, and I think this is the reason why we're sitting here, and I'm going to say in the mayor's office, because that's where it continually happens, that's who has the authority to give the stipend, is the mayor and the mayor's office. And, it happened with the media assistant or special assistant, who is now no longer in that role. A request came down for an increase. It was not approved by the council for an ordinance change, and so a stipend was given. And then along with that is a updated job description. The council has no idea if that person is performing all of those duties, if they were, if they weren't. It's words written on a paper, and it has happened in all of these instances. Some I absolutely disagree with, some I agree with, such as the secretary. I think if these things weren't happening over and over, we wouldn't even be having this conversation or have to define what a stipend is. But when we're just circumventing the system, which is what's happened, then we end up with resolutions and changes like this. And I don't think it's unrealistic, because people are giving, they try and do it the way it's supposed to be done. It's voted down, and so they get it anyway. And that's not okay, and it's not a practice that should be happening. That I'll yield.
Councilor Kadim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I think we all know what the issue is, right? So what we run into is the fact that people are not happy with their salaries, as Councilor LeBeau has stated. The ordinance dictates what people get paid. And if somebody can make an argument that they're performing tasks above and beyond or just make an argument that they need to get paid more money, there's a stipend given, right? Every time we turn around, there's another stipend. And it is unfortunate that we have to come to this situation, because I think there are certain tasks that are very, very specific that stipends should be issued. You've got a hearing officer, which is a stipend which is identified under Massachusetts general law. I think the stipend that the administrator had received in terms of being a custodian of tax title, that's a very specific, defined task, right, that I think is above and beyond somebody, whether it's and a custodian tax title could be anybody, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be the administrator. It could be the CFO. It could be the treasurer. So whoever is performing that should receive a stipend, and I'm okay with that. I guess what I'm not okay with is when we start getting into situations where as Councilor LeBeau had stated, we're not happy with the salary, and as opposed to going to the ordinance committee, or if we do go to the ordinance committee and get shut down, we're giving those stipends out. So the other piece to it is that I think at some point, some of these tasks that people are getting paid for, that the job descriptions, at least a majority of them, should have as other duties assigned. So I think it's not unfair for a taxpayer to expect that even though you're where the city is paying the treasurer to perform the duties of maybe going out for bonding, working with bond counsel, that there may be other treasury duties or financial duties that may be assigned by the administration to be covered within that salary range. So I think from our standpoint, we've come to a point that I think the only person that hasn't gotten a stipend is the mayor, and I think if he could justify getting a stipend somehow, he would already have a stipend. That's just my take, because that's where we're going, right? That's exactly where we're headed. So I think the council, in terms of, he doesn't, no, but I'm sure he's probably tried.
Well, in fairness.
If I know him like I know him, he's probably already tried.
Well, look,
I'll leave
that's
it.
your opinion, but I think
Yeah.
we're trying to talk about the issue of stipends. There are plenty of people at this table that didn't get a stipend, and I think,
Right.
but I think to your point, and we can talk about this, the whole thing starts with the definition of a stipend. What is a stipend?
Yeah, it should be, right, and because I think we know what the definition is, we just got to put it on a piece of paper. A stipend is getting paid for tasks that have not been part of your responsibility. But then the argument could be made that if you've got a job description that says as other duties, and other duties as assigned, you can make an argument that you shouldn't be receiving a stipend. I think stipend should be very, very specific as to specific tasks, not tasks that have been done, continue to be done on a day-to-day basis. Like, the custodian tax title is not done every single day. The hearings officer is not done every day. It's just additional work that comes on. But if it becomes routine work, I don't think somebody should be paid a stipend for routine work. To me, that's not what a stipend is for.
Okay, but I think we may be saying the same thing, we just don't want to admit it.
Mhm.
You still have to define a
No,
stipend.
I agree. I think
All right.
ordinance should say what the stipend is, and then once we get the definition of a stipend, I would also agree that the stipend should be, and listen, I want to give the administration as much flexibility as possible, but the problem becomes is that especially when a specific administration takes advantage of that flexibility, right? Then we're forced to put in parameters in an ordinance to make sure that we're not being circumvented. Everything is being done on the up and up, and we're not just trying to get people additional monies just to get people additional money. So I originally would be okay with saying that the administration would be eligible to give stipends of $1,000 to $1,500 or $2,000. I don't mind that, but I think we're at a point now that stipends should be approved by the city council, because it is another, when we're looking at and we're approving within the ordinance, salary ranges, I think where the city council should be also approving that, because at the end of the day, what we end up seeing is the process being circumvented, which is not the intent. So with that, I'll yield.
Yeah, my concerns are basically the same thing, and you say, what's the definition of a stipend? I think for our purposes, the stipends that we're talking about are basically compensation stipends, not stipends for uniforms and other type things like that, contractual. But it's the payment of additional money as compensation, and then they come down and the administration comes down after the fact and tells us why it was justified. What we're saying is this: if it's justified, then it shouldn't be a problem. Come on down, talk to us. Because I would just point to the tax title, right? That could be 1 year, you could be buried in it, and the next year, there's nothing going on. So if you're buried in it, I think a stipend off the top is something that's temporary, especially if it's compensation. I think it should be temporary, because if it's compensation and it becomes something that's regularly done, then it should be rolled in, like we're doing with most of the other ones that have been there for 20 years. And I don't think it's fair if I'm receiving a stipend that I'm not getting the benefits that I should be getting. And if I was receiving that stipend for 20 years, I haven't received it for my pension, I haven't received it for any other purpose except it's cash just coming to me. I'd rather have it go towards all the other pieces that I get. So I think it's temporary to start off with, on a compensation basis.
Or very specific.
Right.
So to the point, like custodian and tax title, that's got a very defined, but do you know what I'm saying? So that's got a very defined task associated with it, and the stipend should follow the custodian tax title, not an individual, right? So what we're seeing is that stipends are following individuals.
Right.
So it should be a hearing officer. You're getting paid to be a hearing officer. The hearing officer could be yourself, or an assistant corporation counsel, could be the planner. It could be a number of people, as long as they've got trained. But there's a specific task and a stipend assigned to a task that's not being done on a normal day-to-day basis.
If I can, obviously, we can't hit a moving target. I mean, we can sit here and try to define it tonight, but if I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing, we're looking at defining a stipend along the lines of a temporary increase in compensation for a defined task for a defined time. And if that's kind of where we are, I can, assuming I get a stipend, I can try to draft it up for the next meeting. So at least we'll have a discussion point.
Can I just interject on that? So I agree with Council Long that a stipend should be temporary, not permanent. But I also think that we shouldn't handcuff ourselves, because if you're getting to like a custodian tax title, that is should be a permanent stipend attached to a specific task, not an individual. Do you know what I'm saying?
And I agree with that,
Is it
because
a task or a position?
No, well,
It's tasks.
it's a task, yeah.
We call
It's
it
not a
custodian,
position.
Right, right,
it's a task.
right.
So
It
that
is
one,
definitely a task.
right, so that one in itself would be a permanent stipend. Whoever who holds that task would receive that stipend, similar to the hearing officer. But if it's other, I mean, if we get to a point where we can, and right now I don't have a good example, but if it's something that somebody's taking on for, like, so the mayor's secretary, if she's getting that stipend should be temporarily, because she's filling in for the role of the chief of staff, right? So,
Kind of like service out of rank in the
Right.
union
Right.
contract.
Exactly.
Well, let me just suggest, I'll do it either way you want. If you want me to draft a discussion draft of what a stipend might be, or could be, or would be, then I think we'll have something to talk about as opposed to, kind of a free-flowing discussion where we all seem, it's like Chief Justice said about obscenity. I know it when I see it, but I can't define it.
Yeah, basically. No, but I think you understand where we're coming from, is we get blindsided by it, and we're authorizing payments. And when you're saying we start moving money, when we're talking about the organizational chart, you say within a division, we move money, and all of a sudden, somebody gets a $5,000 stipend because it was moved from somewhere else. It's like, wait a minute. That's just being a little unfair to us, if you ask me. So I'm definitely in favor of the resolution, but I do think we do have to define the stipend. But we need to know about who's getting stipends and when they're getting them, except for specific situations, which I would think, are probably already established in ordinance. Are they not?
I don't think so.
No, so Mrs. Viveras is the tax title custodian now, and her stipend, if you will call it that, was rolled into her contract. So the stipend-
Mrs. Sahadi insisted that I get rolled into the base.
No, but if that's the
She
case, then
doesn't
that's
like
better for you.
stipends.
That just opens up another stipend for you for the custodian tax title.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
It's in my job description,
I think that's a good
Yeah.
starting point for
Yeah.
discussion purposes. So based on that, if there's no other discussion, I'll make a motion to table.
Motion to table has been made. Second? It's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Been tabled. We're pretty good now. Next thing is the approval of the minutes of March 5th, 2019. Motion to approve? Motion to adopt, yeah. Motion to adopt is made. Seconded. All those in favor? Next item, opposed? Unanimous. Next item is the minutes of the April 3rd, 2019 meeting.
Second.
Motion has been approved to adopt, what do we adopt those or approve? Approve and adopt. Approve and adopt of the minutes of April 3rd have been made and seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? Unanimous. Any other business? Real quick, we got any other business? I don't believe so. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn been made and seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? Committee on Ordinances is adjourned.